All right. I think the rest of the team will just join us as we get started. My name is Halima. I'm the program manager for the NLC Collaborative, and we have a lot of exciting new things to discuss with you all today. So glad to see you all. Before we get started though, I'd like to do a few ground rules. Please make sure you're muted when you're not speaking. Use the reaction buttons below. I think we're all familiar with Zoom at this point. And of course, please use the chat box maximally. Drop your messages, comments, and we'll be taking note of your remarks. Okay, like I mentioned, we have an action-packed webinar for you today. We'll be discussing three main things. First, as an introduction to the Learning Collaborative, then introducing the main topic of today's webinar, the concept of agency, and lastly, a case study discussion focusing on the Nigeria for Women project. As some of you might be aware, those who had joined the Social Norms Learning Collaborative that was held sometime in September, the Nigeria Social Norms Learning Collaborative is expanding. This is basically as a result of new funding that we got from the USAID, who are sponsoring an Agency for All project. So Agency for All has few regional hubs which overlap with the geolocations of the Social Norms Learning Collaborative network. And so given the fact that these topics are quite interrelated, there was a need to just sort of merge these two communities of practice rather than holding similar activities by two separate community of practice. And what that means is for us in Nigeria, the Social Norms Learning Collaborative Nigeria will now be expanding to become the Social Norms and Agency Learning Collaborative West Africa. And then given the fact that, West Africa has both Francophone and Anglophone countries, we have an Anglophone chapter and we have a Francophone chapter. So what that means is we are focused on activities, focusing not only on social norms, but social norms and agency now. And also our countries have expanded from Nigeria to include the other Anglophone countries, but just given the fact that this would need to be a phased approach and a gradual process, we will be starting with Ghana as the first focus country for social norms and agency. That's Nigeria and Ghana, while we eventually transition to the other countries. The objective of the Social Norms and Agency Learning Collaborative will then be to promote evidence generation, learning, assessment, and strengthening research utilization and capabilities in both social norms as well as building individual and community. Having heard about this expansion, I would like to know what your thoughts are on this expansion. So I'm launch a short Zoom call, and we're doing this in a phased manner, starting with Nigeria and Ghana. I'd like to hear feedback from you on if there are any networks of organizations that you're aware of in these two countries that will be interested in being part of this wider in Nigeria and Ghana who would be interested in being part of the wider learning collaborative in the chat box, just so that, as we are establishing this new collaborative, we are cognizant of all members that should be part of it. Thank you very much. So without much further ado now, I'll hand you over to the project director, Rayhana Ibrahim, who will take us through the first objective of today's webinar, which I mentioned earlier, being that we all jointly understand the concept of agency, understanding how its role in empowering individuals as well as a collective and overall societal change. Before we discuss, the second objective would be the case study focusing on Nigeria for women. Over to you, Rai.
Thanks a lot, Halima. So today's session is really just testing or introducing the agency work and trying to highlight how that ultimately connects with social norms and gender concepts broadly. Speaking to that, or before we begin, we know that agency is quite, maybe I would say, new as a word in our practice, but also different people have different perspectives of what agency means. And we have a poll just to kind of break the ice and begin that conversation, which will pop up right now. And the poll is really seeking to test what our perspectives are on what best exemplifies agency amongst the options. So Charles, if we can please have the poll. Yeah, so the poll should be appearing right now on your screen. In a social context, which scenario best exemplifies agency? We're going to allow 2 to 5 seconds for everyone to select a response that best resonates with them. Okay, looks like everyone has voted now. Great, we can see the results of that poll. Sorry, there's some lag there, and it looks like we're split amongst two of the options. B, capacity to take decisions independently and always conforming to peer expectations. Of course, we see the majority say it's the capacity to take decisions, and we will see more. We will talk more about agency as we move through the slides. Moving to the next slide, we will be looking at sorry, some issues with the slides moving, but we will be defining or starting with definitions of social norms and agency side by side. So as we all know, as members, but also we know we have some new members on the call who aren't quite familiar with the standard definitions of social norms. So we'll do a quick recap of that. Social norms are the unwritten rules that define what is an acceptable behavior, what is appropriate, or what the overarching guide is for people's decisions, right? And within a given group or a community, those things ultimately shape the decisions people make. It's quite different from individual perceptions because social norms really are about what a reference group would think. So it's either what people perceive other people are doing or what people perceive other people expect to happen, right? Whereas agency can be defined by different sociologists, has been defined as the capacity of individuals to act independently and make choices that influence their lives. So it's my ability as a person to take a decision that is a personal decision that will affect or influence different life stages or activities or events, as it were. So we see some connections between agency and social norms. Specifically, we see that social norms have these expectations or these sanctions that are associated with them, either one of exclusion or something that is taken away, or something that is given, or a status that is conferred on somebody for conforming or rejecting a certain action, right? And so most times it's really about what you expect that people approve of or what you think that other people in that community are doing. Whereas on the agency end of things, it's really about choice and those intentional and independent choices that people can make. So we can already see that in reality, if you do have certain norms in place that are limiting a certain group of people, it might affect how much agency people have. Oftentimes, agency is constrained by some norms. Those norms can be around gender, and they're quite common around gender in our context, right? So quite a number of social norms and gender norms affect women's access or women's agency, women's ability to make independent choices about personal things, whether it's their health, their livelihood, the business that they do, and even things around just their general, the general life skills or life decisions that they have to make. They would often require consent to be able to do that. Same with cultures sometimes and religion that may affect everybody, but ultimately shapes what is acceptable and what is not, and might limit the agency or the amount of or the capacity an individual has to ultimately make an independent choice about their own life, right? And so, but then we find that if we have a lot of people who have that agency, we're able to shift a collective norm. So while norms will impact or affect the extent to which individuals have agency, if we're able to break those, in turn, agency can ultimately influence the norms that are in place and shift them to being more positive and inclusive. So, and we can see examples of this in health. We can see that during things around choosing a career or voting during an election. All of these things ultimately require agency. And when individuals can exercise their agency, then they can make these decisions. Why is this important to all of the work that we do? Everything spanning development work, from health to education to empowerment programs to even civic advocacy, ultimately involve people and them making decisions. And if they do not have agency and we're not factoring in their agency and the social norms that limit or promote that, then we would be missing out on key root factors or socio-demographic factors that will impact the success of our intervention. So we need to be aware of it, and we need to build it into our programs. Now, looking at agency a bit more closely, because this is the new concept for us, there are three things that need to be present for us to say that there is agency or a person has agency. The first one is the will to act, right? It means that I'm interested, I'm motivated I have this drive that will make me take action, right? Which means I'm willing to make the change, or I'm willing to take this decision. I'm interested in it and I'm willing to make it happen. The second is the capacity. This includes everything around ability. So is it practical for me to do this? Things around skills. Do I have the right skills to be able to take this decision, whether it's life skills, whether it's decision-making skills, and do I have the information as well, right? So I need to have the information on what pregnancy entails and what potentially like the benefits of delivering the health facility, how to get to the health facility, what it's going to take for me to receive that care, to ultimately go and get the care. This is using health as an example. And of course, I have to have the resources, right? Because we know it's one thing to have the intent, to know, to have the knowledge as well, but then having the resources to then translate my intent to action is also important as we think about agency and people's choice or people's decision-making pathway, right? And then there's a third piece, which is choice, right? Which is that conscious decision making, because I have to actually decide that I want to do it. The will is really a drive. That's I'm willing to do it, but then I may be willing, but not really choose to actually take that action. And there are a number of things that can limit or impact a person's decision or not to choose to move forward with any of these. So to paint this a bit more clearly, on slide 10, we've outlined two scenarios that look at the three components of agency: will, capacity, and choice. So I will give the first scenario. So we're using a scenario of a father choosing or not to practice female genital mutilation or female genital cutting for his daughter, right? So in the first scenario, looking at will, Jamal knows that female genital mutilation is painful and unnecessary, and he was determined not to let his daughter Aisha go through it. So this is an example of someone who's saying, in his mind, he's willing to make the change such that his daughter does not get caught, right? Looking at capacity in this same scenario, however, he didn't have the capacity. He just knew that, okay, this practice is not something that is great, and I'm willing to make the case for why my daughter shouldn't be caught. However, he doesn't have all of the information that is required to challenge that status quo or to push for his daughter to be excluded from this practice, which is common in his community. And he doesn't have all of the facts as well. And for the choice part, he decides to actually go to object to the Female Genital Mutilation Act on his daughter. However, he's not able to convince the community that this is, he's not able to convince the mom, his own mother, and the community leader who typically kind of help resolve this kind of domestic issue. And so with all of this, you find that while he has a will, he doesn't have the capacity. He had the choice, but he was not able to use the knowledge to ultimately make the change. And so that shows us an example of how capacity could be limiting even where there's a will, and the choice has been made to move forward. In the second scenario, we look at will again. And in this scenario, Jamal actually thinks that female genital mutilation is tradition, but he's neither willing nor unwilling. He's really ambivalent. He's on the fence. Like, yeah, this is the norm. This is what happens. And then in terms of capacity, he was lucky enough to be part of a compound meeting or male engagement that was done in his community. And they discussed FGM, they discussed its effects on the victims. They told him how to actually challenge the status quo and all of that. And now he has all of the knowledge to act. However, as the day of the initiation, which is what is considered in this community, Jamal does not challenge the norm because he's scared of the repercussions or the sanctions that will come. Remember, norms will typically have sanctions, right? And he doesn't choose to go forward with that knowledge and the capacity that he now has. In which case, we can see that will alone or capacity alone in both scenarios did not really translate to the outcome that we want. So as we think about programs and interventions hoping to improve agency, for example, it's not enough to just provide funding to women, for example, and hope that they will make better life choices or that they will have or that they will now have voices in the community. We need to be able to improve their choice architecture, and we need to also be able to improve their willingness to make that choice. I think we're going to just pause and do a final poll. This is really all of it. We try to make this very simple and short. We will listen to a case example of an intervention that factored in will, capacity, and choice from the Nigeria for Women project. So I will end here, and we're ending again with a poll, just going back to reference Jamal's approach and what we think about agency, just understanding these three different pillars and ultimately how it connects with social norms. So the poll has popped up on your screens now. So kindly please select in both scenarios how you think Jamal's approach emphasizes the role of individual agency, or which of the options best connotes the concept of agency for you. So we have some votes coming in. So far, half of the people have voted. Maybe we will move along, and if you have like any reflections or thoughts around agency and social norms or questions and general comments, please feel free to put that in the chat. We will move now to discuss a case study from one of the projects implemented in Nigeria that does a very great job of improving agency for women in a very holistic manner. So I will quickly introduce the speaker. His name is Mohammed Sarki Bello. Sarki is a social development enthusiast and gender mainstreaming and inclusion strategist. He's the coordinator of the Niger States project on the Nigeria for Women intervention, which is a World Bank funded project implemented through the Nigerian Ministry of Women Affairs. Sarki has done a lot in social norms exploration and has actively led work around agency and other socioeconomic programs for women. Over to you, Sarki, to quickly walk us through the Nigeria for Women project case study and demonstrate agency and social norms shifts as a result of this intervention. Sarki?
Thank you, Dr. Rihanna. Nigerian for Women project is a project of the federal government of Nigeria that is being implemented in the 6 geopolitical zones of Nigeria. We have 6 states participating in the pilot phase. The first state I'd like to mention here is Niger State, where I am state coordinator. Niger represents North Central in the equation. We have Kebbi State representing the Northwest, where we have Taraba State representing the Northeast. We also have Abia State representing the Southeast, where we have Akwa Ibom State representing the South-South. And then we have the last state, which is Ogun State, representing the Southwest. The project basically has 4 components. The first one is the livelihood programs. This is where the women are supported with non-refundable grants from the project. The grants are of 2 kinds, the individual grants and the collective or group collective grants. The second component there is innovations and partnership. This is where the project partners with programs and projects that are doing similar works or that have done similar works in the past as a way to take new learnings and do peer reviews. Learnings are used to improve implementation. We also have the third component of the project, which is the building social capital. And this is where the women are mobilized into affinity groups and then given project trainings that improve the way they run and manage their micro businesses as a way to support their livelihood. And then lastly, we have monitoring and evaluation, which is the fourth component, where we take new learnings, refine them, and then oversight supervision by TS in the states and also other stakeholders in the federal. The next slide, please. The norms, some prevailing norms we encountered in the course of implementing Nigerian for Women project in Niger State is the first one is the superiority of men in the communities. During the community entries, we met some stakeholders that told us point blank that the women lack the capacity to form affinity groups or even run them as is contained in the project. So they advised us to shelve the idea of reaching out to their women, but we stood on our ground and subtly insisted, and after much sensitization and dialogue with them, they allowed us and gave us the chance, and today the story is different. The second norms that I also want to speak on is public speaking. In the communities there, men and women believe succinctly that women that are outspoken are promiscuous. As a result of that, women don't want to speak on issues in the communities because they don't want to be seen or to be perceived as being promiscuous. So they are silent and voiceless to faults around them. And some of these faults are the social norms that we've talked about and other harmful cultural norms that bedevil their living and livelihood in the communities. The third one is the girl-child education. Sadly, in the communities, the education of the girl child is still being perceived as a worthless venture by the men. And this is because of the belief that the girl child will eventually be married off. So what's the point of investing in her education? And then there's also the financial power. It is believed that lucrative businesses like fishing should be left for men in the communities because men are the providers while women are to be taken care of by men. And women that dare to venture into lucrative businesses are being considered as women that won't be submissive. hence not marriable. Now, this is where I would like to talk about how the project empower individual women and empower women at the individual level and at the group level with agency. The first one there is the will to act. How did the Nigerian for Women project implement or engage with the members of the women affinity groups in order to drive the will to act agency, which falls under mobilization? Women that will belong to these affinity groups have criteria that they must meet before they join and participate in the affinity groups. The first criteria there is that they must be of 18 years and above. The second criteria, again, is that they must have income generating activities that forms their source of livelihood. And this is so that when it is time to make weekly contributions into the group, they don't have excuse to not have what to contribute at the point of savings. And it is through these basic criteria that we were deliberate on those that belong to the affinity groups. The second one there is the capacity to act. This, the project was able to implement through the trainings that were given to these women at the affinity groups. The women were given trainings on financial education, on business skills, on gender and life skills, on loans and credit. And all these trainings are modules of the project that were cascaded to these women that altered their tactical abilities and in the way they run and manage their micro businesses, with the sole view to make their businesses more profit oriented and in the long run grant them agency and improve their livelihood as a whole. The third one there is the choice to act. And this is where the women are supported with non-refundable grants from the project. As of this day, the project has supported women with individual grants of 3.250 billion naira in various sums as was requested by these women. You will kindly recall that before a business plan is funded, a business plan is written on behalf of a woman who is a member of the affinity group, where her business is presented and what she intends to do to upscale her enterprise. And it is based on the amount that is requested and evaluated that an amount is agreed to be paid as a grant support to such a woman. And then the last one is the monitoring and evaluation. And this is where the project uses multi-strata M&E frameworks, which also includes periodic evaluation of the project facilitators, the barefoot business counselors in the communities, and even the grants recipients by both the state technical committees and state steering committees in the state. The next slide, please. Now, our tangible impact across key sectors. The first one is in Niger State, like other states, we were initially supposed to engage with 54,000 women, but the groups were oversubscribed, leaving us with 75,545 women. And as of this day, the Niger State Nigerian for Women project was able to support 75,545 women with individual grants. Health empowerment, how the project was able to facilitate the health empowerment of these members of affinity groups is through the linkage to the primary health care insurance agency. What the project did was to engage with the primary health care, and this was done at the national level, and it's going on in all the implementing states. And the primary healthcare agency lowered the premium that will be paid by these WAG members in order to enable them enjoy free medical services for a period of 12 months, which represent a year. So at the end of 12 months, these women will have to renew their premium in order to enjoy these free medical services that is covered by their insurance. And I think it is also worthwhile to mention here that where the primary health care may not have enough or the capacity to attend to the health issue or challenge that is presented by a member of the women affinity group, the primary health care center gives a referral to other primary health care centers or the general hospitals or tertiary institutions, as the case may be. And the affinity groups, we also have members of the affinity groups that were before the intervention of the Nigerian for Women project were restricted under the PUDA system in the communities. The PUDA system in Islam is a system where these women are restricted to the confines of their home. And it will take a very important reason before the heads of the households, which are the men, grant them permissions to leave their homes. And when these permissions will have to be given, they are usually given when it is dark, so that the women will not have any cause to interact with the outside or with other community members that might be outside their households. So due to the intervention of the Nigerian for Women project, we were able to have women in about 2 of the implementing LGAs that were under the PUDA system who were allowed to activity because engagement that was done, the community engagement that was done with the men and the stakeholders in the community. The next slide, please. So lessons learned. The first lessons we learned from implementing the NFWP is that it is very important to take stock of the social norms that are prevalent in the communities before we develop measures or strategies on how to engage them. Yes, this is done in order to tailor-made specific strategies that can speak to these norms in ways that will not put the project or the objectives of the project in confrontation with the stakeholders, who will naturally want to be vigilant, and so that they don't see their influences or holes in the communities or their relevance obtained by any project or intervention. So it is good to take stock of the norms and then develop strategies on how to work around these norms in a way that doesn't offend the stakeholders in those in the communities. We also engage relevant community stakeholders. Yes, this is where a mapping of the stakeholders is done. Before we engage the stakeholders in any community, we do a mapping. And a mapping of these stakeholders is where they are identified, and then the degree of their influence is also gauged and analyzed. And it is based on this analysis that we now strategize on how to engage them in a way that doesn't offend these sensibilities in the communities of the stakeholders. We also deploy a mix of strategies that we feel are essential in engaging multiple stakeholders as a way to promote and create sustainable change. Yes, these strategies include community dialogue, sensitization, and sometimes even drama in the communities. There is also the need to collaborate and engage third-party stakeholders, such as the financial institutions like the banks. We did this at the point of payment of individual grants, where we got the banks to relax on some of the basic instruments that is required to open accounts for these women. You would recall that these women are basically playing in the informal sector. Then the last one there is an effective way of shifting these norms that promote gender inequality is by increasing the capacity of the people to challenge these norms by themselves. This has played out in Senegal, where the communities are able to renounce female genital cutting through community sensitization that was carried out by a village chief, a man called Demba Jawara. And it was to the credit of this man that 343 communities in Senegal renounced female genital cutting. The next slide, please. Thank you, and it's over from my own end.
Thank you very much, Sarki, and thank you as well, Rihanna, for just briefly reminding us about the concept of agency and how this relates to social norms that we're well familiar with. And again, once more, thank you, Sarki, for helping us demonstrate in action how the Nigeria for Women project has transversed this relationship between social norms and agency. Earlier, we had a poll asking people the fallout from the two scenarios that we'd actually discussed in terms of agency between the two scenarios or two examples of Jamal that we had. And I'm pleased to share with you all. A lot of us were actually able to identify that agency is actually demonstrating some sort of action to actually create change within the community. And as Sarki mentioned, this is in terms of example for Nigeria for Women project, it's the women being able to leave their households, actually engage in financial business transactions in a community previously where women were not allowed to do so because lucrative business was not meant for women for one or different reasons. I mean, as the Nigeria for Women project also shows, in terms of the political empowerment of these women, previously, these were women who were not part or identified as sort of voters, but by the end of this project, they actually had political advocacies. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Sarki, I think you mentioned two communities or two LGAs that were actually able to select their own LGA chairman, most of the voters of whom were women from the Nigeria for Women project, just showing that building the capacity of these women and tying that in with their initial will, because these were women that already had some sort of business idea or were already in some sort of income generating activity, complementing that with some sort of capacity building and giving them the opportunities to actually be part of the financial banking system, have access to voters card and all of that, made transformational changes in their lives as well as their community. Thank you all. So I guess I'd like to throw the questions now to the House. Does anyone have any questions to Rihanna and Sarki Bello on agency, or would you have an experience that you'd like to actually share with the House in terms of your own experience or perspective from a project that you're doing? If you're part of a project or a team that's working to build agency, please raise your hand so that the moderator would be able to unmute you. Okay, I have a question in the chat box from Meredith. How did the project engage men and families to address spousal and family support, as well as mitigate potential domestic violence? Just talking about taking control of income within the house. Sarki, I believe this question is to you.
Yes, thank you, Halima. The project, we have between 3 to 4 ways we engage with the community. The first one, you would recall my mentioning that we do a stakeholders analysis where we identify the stakeholders we need to engage with in this community. Let me give an example. In one of the implementing LGAs, which is Agai local government, our mapping findings informed us that we needed the traditional and religious institutions there. And these are the institutions or the stakeholders that we leveraged on to do our community entries in this local government. The project has a toll-free line where these women, members of these women affinity groups call to submit issues of grievances in their homes. And issues surrounding income and GBV are often resolved even in the palace of the traditional and paramount rulers in the communities. We hold dialogue sessions with the men to explain to them what the project is actually doing. And today, the men are even the ones supporting the women to participate in the project more than what ordinarily the women would have wanted. I say this because we now have situations where the men are the ones reminding the women, you have meeting by 4:30, you need to get ready and start going so that you are not late. And where the women have 1 or 2 chores to do before going for this meeting, the men relax on these chores and tell them, don't worry, I'll take care of it for you. Go and attend to your affinity groups meeting. So we have had these feedbacks from the communities and we have seen them. And the issues of GBV, we have referral centers that are identified that these women do call and report, and we also do our bit to report it to the Ministry of Women Affairs, and where there's a need to involve the securities, the police or the security outfits in these cases, we do our bit and ensure that these cases are resolved. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much, Seriki, and thanks, Meredith, for that question. I mean, just bearing in mind the fact that we identified these norms, men being key stakeholders in sort of reinforcing these norms, it's fantastic to hear that from the onset of the project, we'd actually involved the men, both the spouses as well as community leaders, before the project was implemented, and even more exciting to hear the active role the men are now suddenly playing in encouraging their fellow women. I see another question as well for you, Seriki, still tied to the Nigeria for Women project. This is from Angela. Across the 75,000 women empowered, how deeply would you say these norms are within the community? Are there variations in norms across the different demographics within the community? And if yes, how did this impact on the strategies that were deployed by the project?
Yes, there are variations in these norms across the communities and across the local government areas. And this is why it is very imperative for us to get it right in the stakeholders' analysis and engagement. Like you record my mentioning that in Agri local government, we engage with the traditional and religious institutions or stakeholders rather. But in Wushishi local government, which is the second local government, we engage with women, widows associations, tribal groups, and the religious factor was not so much reckonable in the second local government that we engaged with, because well, there are multitudes of faiths there. There are Muslims, Christians, pagans, and you know, traditional worshippers. So the religious factor there was not the religious consideration. It wasn't so much of a factor there, because we discovered that there are other factors that are stronger, like the women groups, the tribal associations, the widows associations, the trade associations. These were the crop of stakeholders we engaged with in the second local government. And then in a different local government, we also had a mix of both the traditional stakeholders and then the market group association. So the stakeholders vary across the local government areas and across the communities. And it is the stakeholders that your findings provide you with, that you gauge their degree of influence on what you intend to do or to carry out in these communities, and then it will inform the strategy that you deploy in your engagement process with this community or the women.
Thank you for that clarification, Sarki. So just emphasizing that in as much as it's important to always engage the stakeholders, we actually need to map and understand that different stakeholders in different communities are more relevant, and we can't just assume a cross-cutting approach. And I think that answers Angela's question as well in terms of the norms slightly differing across the community. I have Muhammad here who's raised his hand, I think, for a question or remark. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question. Muhammad Tamadi. Sorry, Muhammad, can you please unmute yourself? Okay, perhaps that was an accidental hand raised. If you can hear me though, and you're still interested, we have enabled you to be able to speak. Please keep your questions and comments coming. Muhammad, we can't hear you if you're asking your question. All right, is there anyone who would like to share their experience in terms of trying to advance either individual or collective agency based on their projects? While we think of more questions to ask. Please raise your hand or just drop a message in the chat box.
Thank you very much, Halima, and thanks, Serki. I was just reflecting in trying to understand agency. I find that many times when we go into these communities with programs, and I just want to understand your general perspective. When we go into communities with these programs, and I've done an intervention that tried to layer on economic empowerment, support grouping, and immunization knowledge improvements to see how that will ultimately affect demand. And it was interesting to see that there were some women who really didn't feel like they should be empowered. They actually believe that, they are inferior, and they're very hesitant to lean in. We find it often everywhere, even in terms of women leaders in organizations, and just leaning into saying, yes, I want this, or yes, this is possible. I wonder to what extent you found those intrinsic, would I say, those things that the women themselves have imbibed. Of course, that is due to the feudal or the patriarchal system in the communities, but that resistance that might be coming from the target group themselves, and how you found that might be overcome as we think about agency, because it is a common challenge that we might experience as we integrate agency into our work.
Yes, thank you for this question. Like I mentioned a while ago, these women meet at periodic intervals. They meet on a weekly basis where they hold their weekly meetings and do their weekly contributions to their common cause. And it is from this common cause that they give each other a sort of revolving loan in order to use to solve whatever problems or whatever needs they have in the households. Now, during this interaction at the affinity group level, they are usually guided by a project facilitator who runs the project trainings and modules with them at intervals. And over time in participating in the activities of the affinity groups, they gain this agency. They were able to gain this agency to such an extent that they were able to network amongst themselves, to the extent that even when it was during the last political process, they gained recognition as stakeholders that were met, and their support were requested for the political process during the last election. And this importance or stakeholding that they gained were as a result of what they are doing at the affinity groups. That they have done it over the women are in their third cycle now, and over these 3 years that they have been at the affinity group level, they have attended, they have participated in the group activities, and they have also assimilated the trainings that were given to them by the project facilitators in the communities. And there's no way a woman or a member of the affinity groups will participate in these activities over time and remain the same. These trainings alter their confidence. It gives and grants them agency and confidence to be able to take some personal decisions as it affects them. And you would recall my mentioning that due to the dialogue sessions we hold in the community with the men, with the stakeholders in the community, they don't encounter resistance from the men or from the heads of households. But this is not to say that there might not be isolated cases, and which sometimes can lead to GBV in the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that additional insight, Serki, and also to even, I think, remind us all, one of the key components or the first component for agency is actually having that will. So in as much as you might provide opportunities for people to make choices and have interventions that build their capacity, if that individual themselves does not actually think they deserve whatever it is that you're trying to encourage them or empower them on, it will be difficult to make that transition or relate and ultimately empower them to actually build their own individual or collective agency. So thank you very much for that, Serki, and just showing the Nigeria for Women how we're actually able to advance such situations. I have a question as well, once more to you, Serki, from Mukhtar Gaya, which is basically asking, are there plans to scale up the Nigeria for Women project to other states? I think in your earlier presentation, you've mentioned we have 1 state per geopolitical zone.
Yes, thank you, Halima. Conversations have advanced between the World Bank and the Federal Project Coordinating Unit on the scale-up implementation of this project. As we speak, we're rounding up the implementation of this present phase by March of 2024. Just about 3 months from now, we'll be rounding up the implementation of this present phase. And there's at the last briefing we got on the scale-up, there were about 24 states that have already fulfilled the criteria to participate in the second phase of the Nigerian for Women project. So the preparations for the scale-up have well advanced, and hopefully it will be kickstarted in the March, sometimes around the March of 2024. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Serki. And I think I have a few more questions as well for you. Bukola is asking, do we have the same women attending the group meetings that happen every week? And does the affinity group ever graduate at any point?
Yes, the affinity groups have graduated as we speak. Let me say this. In the beginning, the affinity groups, we meet for a cycle. A cycle is 52 weeks. which is more or less like a year, during which they hold these weekly meetings. Now, the project supports the group with the payment of allowances of these project facilitators in the communities. And after a cycle, these groups are graduated and they stand and run the groups by themselves. As we speak, the project is not paying any project facilitators in the communities any allowance, because these groups are already sustaining themselves. They run themselves, they conduct themselves during these weekly meetings. They collect the weekly dues, they give the loans, and they take note of their expenditures. What we do as a project on a routine basis is we go to do our monthly supervisions and other checks that we have in the project. But for those of them that have been in the first, second, and third cycles, these groups have graduated. What the project is now dealing with is the collective group, where we are dealing with 200 women per group. And this is where we're implementing the collective grant. And like I mentioned earlier, the collective grant is in kind. It's not like the individual grant where various sums of money were paid to these women in order to upscale their enterprise. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much, Sarki. I think that's also clarified. Bukola had another question, which was to basically ask if the same group of women attend the affinity group meetings.
Yes, they attend the affinity groups meeting.
Okay, I think that's it. I think on capacity building, Angela, Sarki had mentioned a few of the strategies that they have, both for the women affinity groups and collective groups earlier as well. And just last round of questions to everyone. Please keep the suggestions coming in terms of your names for networks and organizations that will be interested or you think might be interested in joining the Social Norms Learning Collaborative. If you have additional questions, please put them in the chat box. I will be referring to them. But while we're waiting for these questions, I want to use this opportunity to ask members, understanding that we're now shifting to a learning collaborative that's focused on both social norms and agency. And with this preliminary introduction into the concept of agency, I actually want to ask if there are any suggestions to us, the team here, in how this expansion should be set forth. We'd already mentioned we're doing it in a phased manner, starting and focusing with Nigeria and Ghana only. But if you have additional suggestions to the House, please drop the message in the chat box or raise your hands so that you can be called upon.
Thanks, Halima. I also just wanted to highlight that because the expansion is not just geographic, it's also in terms of the scope or the focus area. So before, a lot of what we've looked at have been organizations doing work in social norms, many of which would be SBC type of programs that are trying to shift norms, but also government programs and how to factor in norms in a scientific way into the design and monitoring of their interventions. But now, as we move to agency, we know that there are other organizations in Nigeria that we're missing that are doing work, mostly not in the typical development sector cohorts that might also come to mind. So kindly also refer us, suggest in the chat or via email later as it comes to mind, those organizations, because we're currently in the process of doing a mapping of potentially new organizations that we can work with and learn from. But also organizations or entry points to other countries. So any ideas or thoughts that you have, whether it's in the organization or even the method of entry to these different organizations or countries, then that would be very great as well.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you for that, Raya. As we are all dropping our remarks and suggestions, I have the question from Muhammad as well. Basically saying, how can we help Borno State Ministry of Religious to partner on the Nigeria for Women project, or to assist fellow Nigerian religious leaders such as imams and pastors who are always talking to their followers on norms shifting?
All right, thank you, Halima. Let me mention here that sometime last year, around September, I had the pleasure of leading the Borno State Commissioner of Women Affairs and the company of my national coordinator to the women affinity groups in one of the local government areas. She was in Niger State to understudy what we have done with the women affinity groups as a gateway to the participation of Borno State in the phase 2 that is about to start sometime in the March of next year. So let the gentleman should have his fears allayed, or his concerns allayed rather. Borno State has fulfilled all the participation criteria, including the payment of the matching grants for participation in the phase 2 of Nigerian for Women project. Thank you.
Thank you for that update, Sarki. I think the Borno team are glad to hear that. Muhammad, you still have your hand raised. So I don't know if you have an additional question that you want to share with the House. Muhammad Tamadi. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for this active. Okay, sorry, I have a comment here. I think that's a suggestion from Dr. Biaya in terms of members that will be interested in joining the SNLC. Thank you very much, Dr. Biaya. This is well noted. Please drop your message recommendation for the expansion to the collaborative in the chat box. Our team is taking note of your suggestions and facilitate. As we're waiting on more questions, I just want to also use this opportunity to thank everyone and just mention these current social media channels that we have for the collaborative are still active. So if you do remember at a later time any suggestion for an organization for the collaborative or recommendation in terms of our approach for the expansion, please feel free to contact us on any of these platforms. And we would also share with the team new platforms that reflect the new nomenclature and naming of the organization to the West African Learning Collaborative. All right. Thank you all. Thank you so much for joining in this webinar, the first webinar by the now newly expanded Social Norms and Agency Learning Collaborative. It was great to see you all and great to have all these engagements with you. Please keep in touch with any of these, with us through any of these platforms. And we look forward to hearing from you soon or seeing you soon. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.